today we're going to look at Edward Faragher and Karl Roeder, who I think is perhaps a figure who's not as well known as he really ought to be. And so this is the title of my particular talk. I often think of you and very few beside you, and we'll come on to where that particular quote comes from towards the end of the talk, to be honest. And so I'm talking here about, say, Edward Faragher and Karl Roeder, seeing them very much as folklorists and friends, not seeing that one's a collector and the other's an informant to try and see there's some sort of exploitative relationship between them, but seeing them as being equals. And as I said, they are both folklorists and they are both friends. So this is where we're talking about. So it's a lovely little map here. This shows you here of Cregneash. We all know where Cregneash is, but I think it's also important to be reminded that around Cregneash there's other smaller communities as well. So Cregneash is the small nucleated settlement, as we know, but there's also Fister, there's Cregneash, there's the How, and so on. And this was also the area in which Faragher collected. He didn't just collect the folklore of Cregneash, he was visiting Cregneash, he was going to Fistart and so on. He's also up Serbia as well, collecting material as well. And here he is, if we want to know what he looks like. This is the familiar photograph of him. There's only 2 photographs, I think, of him in existence, but this is a lovely photograph of him here. You can actually see him sort of sitting outside his cottage. He's reading what we assume is the final edition of the Manx Bible, the 1819 edition, and dressed rather fetchingly, I think. I think a range of Edward Faragher clothing could go down quite well, I think. But as we know, he was known as Ned Beg, or Ned Beg Homroy, because his father was Ned Beg. He was born at Cregneash. He had a period where he lived in Liverpool for 7 years, and then he spent the rest of his life until the end of his life, as we'll come on to, when he had to leave Cregneash. He worked all his years as a fisherman. He spoke Manx and English, which is not unusual in this particular period, although when he was going to school, you could see English was starting to come in. There's a wonderful letter where Roeder is trying to collect children's folklore from him, and children's folklore in Manx. And he writes to Roeder saying, we were playing school, you know, when I was at school, we played in English. So you could see already, although he's born 1831, you can see that, so, you know, that the language is stopping to be transmitted even that early. But he's also another intriguing character as well, because he was also able to fluently write in Manx. No other figure in the 19th century did. There was no call, there was no need to do so, but he certainly developed the fluency in Manx that enabled him to copy large amounts of material of his particular collecting, which he translated into Manx. Also material too that he was also a poet as well. He composed in Manx, and there's also a large number of letters from him sent to Karl Roeder in Manx as well. So yeah. And this is Cregneash. This doesn't come across particularly well on the slide, but this is taken from the Ordnance Survey, the 25-inch Ordnance Survey of the 1860s. And you can see Cregneash down there on the bottom left-hand corner there. You can see that it's clearly a small crofting community here. You can see the other farms there are just standing. You see the Sound Farm is quite clearly up there in the top left from the large field sizes. Down here you can see that it is this typical crofting community here of people owning small plots of land which they're working when they're not away at sea, because we'll have a look now at what the social structure of Cregneash is. This is a wonderful photograph. This is a photograph from 1889. I'm always surprised, to be honest, as how few photographs we do have of Cregneash, given that it was very much on the visitors' trail of which Faragher suffered later in life for that, because he was this poet, and because he did indeed send his poems out to people who requested them. People then turned up at his cottage asking for copies of his poems. So he became this sort of known figure in the community, which caused other people in the community to actually take against him. But so I'm quite surprised then, given the numbers of people who visited Cregneash, and given that it was absorbed into this cult of primitivism, you know, that if you wanted to see the old real Manx ways, you know, you had to go to Cregneash. There's that great quote from the Reverend James Cummings there, where he says, you know, that the Manx, it's actually passing now, and that, you know, that the last place you'll hear Manx spoken is Cregneash, and that was written in 1843. So he says, here the Manx language lingers and may linger some time longer. You know, well, we know it. That was completely false. But what I like about this particular photograph, and I think what we need to understand from this particular photograph, is the numbers of houses that don't have thatched roofs. I mean, it's sold to us now as a folk museum. As I said, this is the place where you'd go to see sort of true Manx primitivism. But clearly there's enough people have had enough of thatch. They've taken their thatch off, they've shoved on an extra story, they've slated their roofs, and they've also built out to the backs as well. I haven't done the maths, but I rather suspect there's more houses there that got slate roofs on that have actually got thatch roofs on. And that is because, as we'll come on to, this was at times a particularly rich community. If we look here, this is Cregneash in 1901. This is Cregneash from the census in 1901. 92 people living there. It's split into 45 males, 47 females. See, the youngest there is Robina Karen, just 6 months old. The eldest was Ellen Madrill here, 75, born in 1825. And you can see the occupations here are quite split. You know, there's 12 men at sea, there's 13 people working on land. You've got 6 fishermen, 5 of them were mariners, one's a sailor, 6 farmers working on the land, 2 brothers, 1 son, and a farm labourer. And that leaves to say you got a tailor, a labourer, and a stonemason. And I presume that's the person who's working at Spanish Head, which, as we know in this particular period, was a source of slate lintels. That's the men. Occupations are quite poorly recorded for the women. I mean, 2 are widows. One's entered as living on their own means. There's 2 dressmakers. One was a grocer. That's the one who kept the little village shop. And one was a housekeeper. But we know in this particular period that the women in Cregneash were working in the boarding houses in Port Erin and Port St Mary. And the reason why they don't turn up in the census, because the census is taken to actually not capture seasonal occupations, but to capture full-time occupations. And that's why the censuses were held in April or May. So it didn't catch people who were away doing harvest work, for instance. And the absence of women during harvest time, we always have to remember in this particular sense, a lot of the labour relations were gendered. And this is a great letter here from Faragher to Karl Roeder in 1896, where Faragher himself is having to go out and work in the harvest because there's not enough women to help out in the harvest. And so I have this I think that you can have this wonderful idea of these women from Cregneash walking down the hill to Port Erin and Port St Mary to do the breakfasts and clean the laundry from people who are staying in Port Erin and Port St Mary, who are then walking up to see this village supposedly out of time, and then to see people like Edward Faragher working in the fields when Edward Faragher was a fisherman who certainly did not want to work in the fields. But, and this is another issue here as well. Let's look at the language split here. You get 43 people were able to speak Manx and English, and 45 people were speaking English only. But even in this particular period, it really was just the elderly members of the community who were speaking Manx, and you see very little transmission of Manx to the younger generation in this particular period. So that's having a look there at Cregneash, having a look there as sort of, you know, background to Edward Faragher. Let's come on to this particular character who may or may not be particularly well known. This is a wonderful photograph of him. This is Karl Roeder. It says born in 1848, dies 1911. And this is a photograph of him here, clearly taken in 1909. He was a German national. He moved to Manchester. If you trace him in the census records, he first starts working on the Manchester Ship Canal. I presume he's working as a correspondent because he's obviously fluent in German, presumably then also equally fluent in English as well. But at some particular stage, he seemed to take a pivot and sort of started working for himself. And from what I can understand, he seems to be a machinery sales agent. So I presume he was either buying and selling, or rather importing or whatever, seeing the importing of machinery either into the Lancashire cotton industry or perhaps shipping to Germany. But it's certainly at one particular date he encounters Edward Faragher. We don't know when he comes across Edward Faragher. And he starts a correspondence with him. The first letter we have between Faragher and Roeder, it dates from 1896. So whether he encountered him earlier than that, we don't know. We also know that Roeder had visited the Isle of Man certainly in the 1880s. There's also what has just come to light is a marriage as well. He married in Lezayre. And that marriage did not last long because he turns up in the census records as being single. So so we don't know when he encounters Edward Faragher, but he certainly, after he encountered Faragher, he certainly encouraged him to collect folklore. I want to just sort of wind back a bit here and look at John Hudson. John Hudson was the weaver at Ballyfesson, and Karl Roeder comes across him as well. So he's not just encouraging Edward Faragher to go out and collect folklore as well. He's certainly encouraging John Hudson as well. And as ever, there may well be other figures who we don't have the correspondence from them to know who else he recruited to collect Manx folklore. But the material from John Hudson at Ballyfesson is absolutely quite fascinating here. This is a letter. There's a large numbers of letters from John Hudson to Karl Roeder. And I quite like this one here. It's quite clear that Roeder is staying with him. As it says here, we must try and make you more comfortable than to let you stretch on a couch. I find this fascinating because this is Ballyfesson. I mean, Port Erin at this particular time had developed as a tourist spot, so he could quite easily have gone and stayed in a hotel. There's no reason for him to be, and I don't think he's slumming it. I think he wants to live the life. It's as simple as that. That he's up there with John Hudson. That he's collecting folklore from him, or encouraging him to collect folklore as well, and that he's simply staying overnight there, sleeping at Ballyfesson. But another intriguing thing. And this is the great thing, it's remarkable the resource we have in the Manx Museum Library for letters between, not just between between Edward Faragher and Karl Roeder, but between these other folklorists as well, and then other later figures as well. This is John Hudson's grandson writing to Sophia Morrison here about Karl Roeder. And it's just this wonderful little one line here, and here we can see Roeder learning Manx. You can sort of, weigh up, did he learn Manx? Did he not learn Manx? Did he learn Manx from Faragher? Did he not learn Manx from Faragher, or whatever? And here's quite clear. So this is where he was learning his Manx from, which is probably why he wasn't disappearing back to the boarding houses in Port Erin. He was staying with John Hudson so he could get as much Manx, as much conversational practice with him as possible. How much Mr. Roeder benefited, I do not know. Well, we know he did benefit because he takes down passages in Manx in quasi-phonetic script from John Hudson. That's amongst his papers. And this is another lovely letter. I think this speaks to the impression that Roeder made on the Hudson family here. This is where they're writing to let him know that John Hudson has died. And it mentions here, where we don't know, will this letter find you or not? But if it does, we shall be very pleased to hear from you. And if ever you are in the Isle of Man, please call and see us. We remain your sincere friends. And we'll see this warmth, repeated with Edward Faragher. And another thing as well, I spoke last week about the Sophia Morrison rescuing in many ways going round when she was in Manchester, because she was house sitting for her brother, going round to Roeder's sister and getting some of the Faragher material from him. And you see Hudson knows about this here. I'm glad to know you came into possession of Mr. Roeder's writings. He was very earnest in his pursuit of the language. I will certainly give you a call next time I'm over, and perhaps you'll show me the information he got from my grandfather. And again, I mentioned last week that this material was circulated amongst all these other figures such as J.J. Neen, William Cubban, and all these other sort of leading luminaries of the Manx language revival. And once again, it's thanks to Edmund Goodwin that some of this material has in many ways been safeguarded. Manx words, etc., from John Hudson, Weaver, Ballyfesson. This is material that Roeder collected, that Morrison obviously obtained from Roeder's sister, that passed into circulation, and but for Edmund Goodwin's transcript, this material would be lost. Okay, but what survives? Let's get on now to some of this particular, let's have a look at some of the folklore materials. It's a lovely little quote, this one. I have not gotten many things put in the book yet. This is a letter from 1896. And what we do have surviving as ever. So it's a question as to how many notebooks are there? Were there more notebooks or not? But certainly sitting in the Manx Museum Library, we have 4 notebooks in the hand of Edward Faragher. And there's one, and obviously there's been a 5th notebook because there's numerous disbound pages gathered together in a folder here called Manxiana. So these are absolutely remarkable resource, and this is what one of them looks like. Faragher's handwriting is a dream. He was obviously taught well. He went to school in Port St Mary. He's taught well down there. And you can see Roeder's minuscule handwriting there at the top. And you can also see it's been dated. And you can see Roeder's stamp there as well. These are absolutely remarkable. We have 4 complete ones. We have some disbound ones. You simply cannot find this material for anywhere else in the British Isles, to be honest. You know, you can't turn up to, say, the British Library and ask for this sort of material. You can't turn up to the National Library of Scotland. You can't turn up to the National Library of Wales. You can't turn up to the National Library of Ireland and say, do you have any notebooks written down by an insider to, you know, Irish culture, Welsh culture, Scottish Gaelic culture, whatever it is, do you have any notebooks? And they'd have to say, no. You turn up the Manx Museum Library and ask the same question, they can say, yes. We have 4 of them, by the way, and remnants of a 5th. Do you want to have a look at them? And so this is what they are. They're just an absolute treasure trove. And actually say they're just so simply easy to read. And this is what Roeder was doing. He would send Faragher these notebooks, and Faragher. So sometimes you get a particular sense that Faragher thought that instead of him recording folklore for Roeder, that what he really wanted to pass on to Roeder was his poems. And so you can see there's almost times like a quid pro quo. There's like page after page after page of folklore. Then there's poems, bit more folklore, and then a poem to end off. So it's almost like, okay, there's something here for me and there's something here for you. And that's the way it goes. But if you want to have a look at some of the particular material here, just have a look down there. If you look down there at what's on the page on the right there, there was, and there, yeah, this is just a page that goes on here. And this is how it starts up. You know, there was another old woman telling me that her husband went out at night, and when he came in again, he told her that she had better get to bed, for the fairies was about, and asked him if he had seen them. No, he said, but he had heard them. He took up a stone, he said to knock something on the garden hedge, and the fairies commenced to knock all around him. He was sure they were about him. He said the wife said they would like to see them. She went outside and they began to knock around her, and she got in the house again as fast as she could. And this is we're certainly going to get a lot more of these. Don't worry, I love these ones. But this shows you very, very much what he was collecting, these small, short passages. So what he's not doing is writing down lengthy, long prose narratives. So he's not collecting folk tales in that particular sense. He's collecting what's now called short forms. So it is these little, you know, these fairy legends, and these, and he actually mentions at times that all that he can collect is this sort of short tales. And you think, well, this is what we want. The more short tales we want. I don't want a notebook that's just got one tale in. I want a notebook that's got lots of short tales in them as well. And this is, as I say, so what you get is that he fills these notebooks in, sends them off to Roeder. And then Roeder has queries with the particular material. And then he sends the book back with headings on each and every page. We've got a transcript of this page, so he comes back to him and asks him questions. And you can see some of the questions he's asking here about, you know, the big boy of the wind, the captain of the fairies. And then, you know, so he's asking him, can you tell me something more about the big boy of the wind, the captain of the fairies? Now, the fact that we don't have anything in the letters or the notebooks show we do have missing notebooks, because he's querying material that we don't have to hand. And so we had Ned Beg coming back telling us who was the captain of the fairies, and that someone in Glen Chas encountered the captain of the fairies. And once again, when you encounter the fairies in ways when you shouldn't be counting fairies, because you should be in bed at night. That's what the fairies tell us to do. When it gets dark, you put out clean water, food for them, and you go to bed. You should not be out at night, and if you're out at night, something happens. In this particular case, they came across the big boy of the wind, the captain of the fairies, who knocked him down and he went to bed. And he was 10 or 7 years, he lay in bed until he died. And that's what happens. You cross the fairies and you cross the fairy folk and you'll get harm. And then once again, so you can see on that, that's on the one side of the page, and here's what he's saying here, you know, who and where was he and what did he do? And yeah, and so this is, so there's this very much this sort of to and fro between Faragher and Roeder. And it's not just the notebooks. There's letters. There are to date 42 letters we have from Faragher to Roeder. And once again, these letters contain folklore as well. There's one remarkable letter where he lists all the fields in Cregneash. He gives all the field names in Cregneash, plus their translations into English, and the ones that he can't translate, he just says, well, they were christened by the fairies, you know, they're in Manx, you can't translate them, you know, that's it. The fairies gave the names to the fields. And this is a letter here. You see, you might notice here, this is material that's turned up amongst J.J. Neen's papers, because this is Sophia Morrison passing on letters to people in her particular circle, which didn't get passed back after her death in 1917. This is a lovely one. There's the fairies eating up and replacing the cowrie dish, you know. And what a great line there. I went to see a man last night at Glen Chas. It's not the sort of thing we say these days, is it? You know, what did you do last night? Well, I was at Glen Chas getting a few fairy tales, you know. But this is the notion here, you know, his stories but what this does show you is that Faragher's not just in Cregneash, you know, he's going down to Glen Chas, he's collecting material in Glen Chas. And this is a great story as well. This is the two young men coming home and seeing the cowrie that had been prepared for them. And they see that the fairies are in there scooping it up. And then as soon as it's empty, they spit in the dish and it fills up again. And so you can see you've got a dilemma here. You know, what do you do? Do you eat, knowing that the fairies had spat in it, or do you leave it? And the person who doesn't eat it, the person dies. The person who eats it lives. And once again, it's one of the fairy rules. You don't turn down gifts from the fairies, and you don't waste food. It's as simple as that. This same fairy legend was collected by Sean O'Hocker out in Donegal in the 1950s. It turns up in Fairy Legends from Donegal, which is an absolutely remarkable book. And Sean O'Hocker trained Leslie Quirk when he was the field worker for the Manx Museum Folklife Survey as well. So it all links up. But this is you know, once again, this is yet again the same letter. You know, he's not just content in giving one particular fairy legend. We have another fairy legend here, and this is another one too that was collected by Waldron as well when George Waldron was in the Isle of Man in the 1720s. This same legend was circulating in the Isle of Man at the same time then. Once again, you see no water in the house. One of the servants' girls refused to go out and get water as the hour was late. The old beggar woman is lodging in the house. This is the particular time when farmhouses would keep what was called a beggar's bed, where people could go from farmhouse to farmhouse to farmhouse and be put up for the night and particularly fed. And the fairies had a christening but no water to baptise the baby. And so they came to the girl that refused to get water and bled her under the nail of the big toe. And so they baptized the child in her blood. And then the woman began to pine away, and the girl began to pine away rather. And once again, because she hadn't put out fresh water, she hadn't put out fresh food. Once again, the fairies telling us that this is what we should do each and every night. And then he told them about the cup, and they lifted the flag and took it out, and the young woman got well again. And if she's not dead, she is alive yet, you know. And once again, this also shows, seeing when the woman came again on her rounds, and once again, I think this also is to offer hospitality to those travelling folk, those who were travelling from farm to house, those people who were indigent, and they basically was the community that was supporting them by them going from farmhouse to farmhouse. And so you offer hospitality, and because you offered hospitality, she was able to save the life of the young girl who didn't do what she should have done, which is to leave out fresh water for the fairies. And this is another one. You get these wonderful things that you just wonder what's going on here. You know, this is once again one of our crew. This is Faragher when he's away fishing, and he's clearly collecting material whilst he's away at Crookhaven. Once again, you know, before he left home, he's looking at a great bonfire on Glenchas Hill. There was no fire, no sign of fire in the morning. You know, so the fairies are clearly up there lighting fires at night. Why? We don't know, but well, all we can really say is, well, they did it. You know, they did it. They did it. And, you know, this just goes on. This is the same letter, by the way. This is not me choosing another letter. This is just the same letter. And there's even more material in this particular letter as well. He was a classic one here. I think he was a bit surprised here at Faragher to find out that, once again, you know, this is an informant. Someone is living in a cottage down at Perrig, coming home from the Ilvari at midnight, heard talking around the house. He couldn't make out, you know, one word of this. There must have been foreign fairies that could not speak Manx. So I think Faragher was quite surprised because fairies only speak Manx to him, and so he was quite surprised here to find that fairies do speak languages, a language other than Manx. But there is another fascination that Edward Faragher had, and this is with what's called the fairy sweetheart, Rhiannon She. And this is a figure. You know about the Rhiannon She? They're often women. Well, actually, rather than me explaining to them, let's have Edward Faragher explaining to you who they are, because this is, you see, I was once myself coming home from Port Erin Chapel. And it's a very fine night, you know, I was on top of the hill. I met a young lady in a yellow silk dress. They're either singular or they are together. They tend to have blonde hair. They tend to dress in white. Some of them are also dressed in the latest Parisian fashions as well. So they're quite easily spottable to be quite frank. You know, white parasol in the left hand hanging down by his side, but neither of us spoke, which is good, because if you ever speak to them, then they follow you forever. And that is the particular problem of speaking to the Rhiannon She. There's a story of one Manxman who was pursued by a Rhiannon She, and so he decided the way to get rid of her was to emigrate to America. And so he emigrated to America, and she followed him there as well. There's a fairy house on Ballahick. This also, Edward Faragher tells us about this as well. And there was someone who once met a Rhiannon She, didn't realise that she was the Rhiannon She. And he goes into the fairy house at Ballahick and dances with her, and he's starting to sweat, and he uses her handkerchief to wipe his brow. And even that is sufficient. He didn't speak to her, but simply using her handkerchief that she then followed him for the rest of his days. But this is his fascination here with them. Neither, you know, the people were telling me it's Rhiannon She, and I would have spoken to her. She would have followed me. Yes, well, he knows that. So the next Sunday night, I went across the hill at the same hour, intending to speak to her, but she was not there. This is remarkable. You know, this shows you the depth of belief that some individuals, or certainly Edward Faragher here, had in the fairy world, and also he's actually willing to risk even speaking to one, knowing the consequences of it, that she would follow him forever. But yeah. And he was also spotted next to one as well. You know, this is another one here. You know, I went over that cronk one night at 5 when I was a young man. There's some men standing at the foot of the cronk beside the houses. They immediately stopped their sport when I made my appearance on top of the hill. I was alone and had no one with me, but they all said they saw some person beside me dressed in white. You know, it's obviously clearly a Rhiannon She. But I not believe them, although they all affirmed it was the truth. But the Glen Chas is a likely place for fairies, with its deep glen and running stream. You know, I just love this stuff. You know, it's just in the notebooks. He's just collecting material after, you know, legend after legend, story after story after story, and sending it on to Roeder. But not only was he interested in recording these, you know, so shall we say, fairy legends and other folklore as well. I mean, he's fascinated by fairies, but he also collects other material as well for Roeder. But we also can get his own views on fairies as well. And this is one of his great lines as well here. He says, you know, these days people are getting enlightened, you know, it's all. And this is what he says to Roeder here. Again, this is the notebook from 1897. You know, I think I cannot pick up any more fairy tales, as the old people who knew about them are all gone, and few of the young ones that believe in fairies. But the world has gone to be very unfaithful, and there are many that don't believe even the Bible in these days. So people are getting enlightened. So you can see here he's noticing that beliefs in fairies are now starting to go. He's noticing here, say that it's only the old people who still believe in them. And it's interesting here how he reflects here on the changes in Cregneash. You know, the people are not as simple as they used to be. They are more wicked and are not so friendly as the people in the past. And here he says, you know, I remember when I was a boy, when the season for setting the potatoes was come, the whole of Cregneash people were all helping one another until everyone had their crops down. But now no one will help the others, and they have to get others to help and pay for it. So you can see those sort of social bonds of obligation. I help you with the hay, you'll help me with my potatoes. I help you with barking your nets, you'll help me with this, and so on. That sort of reciprocity is now gone now, and so is a question that if you want someone to help you, you pay for it. And also perhaps people expect to be paid as well. And he says, see, I love this one here. I fancy the old farmers that used to provide for the fairies was far kinder to the poor than the farmers of our day. Even my own mother kept a bed for the poor that came to lodge that way, but beggars get very little nowadays. I mean, Faragher notices, for instance, that the people now keep their doors shut at Cregneash, that in the past doors would always be open. You could just walk in without announcing yourself. He also notices too, there used to be a big bumper of buttermilk. So if you were thirsty, you could just walk into a cottage. You could just help yourself to buttermilk and then move on. And this was starting to change. The people were now living this more enclosed individual life. And as he said, people then had no reason for the fairies in that particular sense, had no reason for these particular fairy beliefs. And once again, but you know, this again, so say he was surprised that on that other particular occasion to encounter fairies speaking other than Manx, but this is it here. The woman that keeps the shop in Cregneash was telling me this morning that she heard the fairies in the garden again, but did not understand their language. Very likely they are speaking the Manx language yet, and there is very few can understand them. I never heard them talking myself. I suppose they would not like me to hear, for I might understand them if they speak Manx and might expose them. You know. And once again, that he comes across someone else here living at Cregneash who he suddenly, you know, I think he's a bit surprised here to realise that fairies don't just live in the Isle of Man as well. He's got it here now. But you see, they've deserted all the countries round about us as well as our little island. There is a Shetland woman living at Glen Chas, and she has great yarns about Shetland fairies. It appears the fairies were all over Europe in old times. There's nothing recorded from this woman about Shetland fairies, which is a bit of a particular pity. So you can see here, as I say, he's at Cregneash. He's down there at Glen Chas. So he's not just collecting folklore in Cregneash itself. He's all over the Meal Peninsula. And once again, we've got some of his other particular ideas here about the Munge Vega. Yeah, some of them were very mischievous and others were very kind, but I think we are much better without their company. You know, this is the one thing that's always said about the fairies, is you never know where you are with them. You know, you can do all you can to stay on their good side. You can put water out for them, you can put food out for them, you can lead a good life, you can go to bed when it's dark, you can make the fire up for them, you can let them come in and bake cakes, you can let them come in and sort of slaughter beef and make pies and all this sort of stuff. You can let them do all of this, but it still doesn't mean that they're not going to cause you harm. You know, you still have to be careful with them. And again here, this you know, the idea that Faragher is saying, you know, that there are some folks very good for seeing fairies. I've not come across myself, but very little. But but I don't want either to get among them, for I think I am too faint-hearted. He's actually willing to go off and meet a Leanne and she and have a fairy mistress for the rest of his days, but he doesn't actually. But I think what he's showing here is that you don't really want to look them out. It is this particular sense that the fairies don't live in our world, but we live in their world. And so they set the rules for us mortals about how we should behave amongst ourselves, otherwise the fairies will come down and cause harm to us. And as he says here, the fairy days are over, and I don't think many people wish them to come back again. So he's very ambivalent. He is very ambivalent about fairy beliefs. But this is where he actually talks here they are only foolish things, he says. Instead of he sends one of the notebooks on to Edward on to Karl Roeder here with this note at the end. I send you this book because I'm not likely to get any more fairy yarns. They are only foolish things to make the best of them, yet they may amuse children, And so I think this shows you again his ambivalence towards this one. And again, this is what he says here. Since the old fairy stories are gone, not even one fairy has been seen, and the old fairy stories are gone. Well, so if you're not going to tell stories about the fairies, you're not going to believe in fairies, you're not going to believe in fairies, you're not going to tell stories in fairies. So you get that sort of association. You see, and this is interesting. You see, it's these little one-liners you get here that give us this insight into life in Cregneash and Glenchas and elsewhere in this particular period. The old men aren't meeting in the houses as they used to tell stories. So whether there were ever ceilidh houses in the Isle of Man or not, as you do get in Ireland and you do get in the Gaelic-speaking areas of Scotland, we don't know. But Faragher certainly does mention one house in Cregneash where young people used to gather. It was old Etty who used to teach them to sing and dance. And one other thing I haven't mentioned, I didn't put this slide up, is Edward Faragher writes, it's appended to Aesop's Fables, which comes out in 1901, a sketch of old Cregneash, where he sort of gives this wonderful pen portrait of life in Cregneash. And once again, we do have the fuller manuscript of that. We don't have the original of that, but once again, this is one of the manuscripts that Sophia Morrison got from Roeder's sister, passed it on to Edwin Goodwin, and Edwin Goodwin made a full transcript of it as well. It's absolutely fascinating. And so again, we have to thank Morrison for what she did. She tried to meet Faragher, She went on 2 occasions, and she said on both occasions he was out. And that was it. So she never met him. You would have thought she could have been a bit more persistent. But anyway, I don't know. But yeah, so she never met him. But fortunately, thanks to her knowing Roeder, thanks for her staying on good terms with Roeder, thanks for her being in Manchester, thanks for her going around to see Roeder's sister, that she got most of these notebooks, letters and so on, and as I say, other manuscripts that have now disappeared, but thanks to Edwin Goodwin for copying them, and thanks for Edwin Goodwin's papers turning up in the Manx Museum, all this material would be lost. So once again shows Sophia Morrison's key role in safeguarding this material for us, and in many ways having copies made by Edmund Goodwin as well. I think that's another reason. I think he was a useful scribe, but I think it was also a question of we've got the originals, but we've also got copies as well, just in case something happens to them as well. So the sort of and once again, change in language here as well. The young people gather to speak English, and to tell worthless things that old people don't take any pleasure at all, Yes, yeah, Therefore, it's time to go to bed and to take our rest. Good night, And I was going to end the talk there, but I do have far more slides. I think I've been a bit too quick this time. I'm sorry about that, but I still have some more slides, more slides to come, and there's something that we can talk about. So we know, maybe we don't know that Edward Faragher did not see out his last days in Cregneash. This is just absolutely heart-rending what actually happened to this one, I say. And I think this is a true word, exile, 1907. He has to leave the Isle of Man. His daughter decides to emigrate to Canada, taking the children with her. And there was no one in Cregneash to take Faragher in. There was nowhere else for him to go. So he had to end up at Alfreton in Derbyshire. If you want to know where Alfreton in Derbyshire it is, it's down there at the bottom. And so his son worked there, and so Faragher had to leave the Isle of Man, end up in Alfreton there, which was a mining village. And so he leaves Cregneash to go and see this. He moves from Cregneash to a mining town, a mining village like this at Alfreton College. And this quite clearly was heartbreaking for him as well. We have this letter here from 1907, and this is a round robin letter sent soon after he arrived here, March 25th, 1907. My dear friends, I embrace the present opportunity of writing these few lines to you, hoping you are all in good health as this leaves me at present. And he goes on. And this is just so sad. I am not longing for much but a sight of the sea. I mean, yeah. To go from Cregneash to looking at that every day. And with everything that's associated with that, the noise, the smell, living in a place with coal heaps and coal spoils and so on compared to Cregneash, absolutely heart-rendering. Okay, Hall Caine, remarkably, and sadly comes into the picture here. I say because Faragher had to leave the Isle of Man in 1907, he was in sort of distressed circumstances, as they say earlier than that, because he was a fisherman. Fishing was still going on in his time in the 1890s, but the boats that were going to Kinsale to Crookhaven were fewer and fewer, as the Kinsale mackerel fishing, the spring mackerel fishing off Ireland, was in many ways coming to a close. They were selling boats in Peel in this particular period in the 1900s simply for the wood and the metal in them, for the iron in them as well. They were selling, and this is what I mentioned last week. I mean, Sophia Morrison's father, he dies 1880, so he dies at the time when the Kinsale mackerel fishing is still going well, but he was smart enough that as he was making money, he was actually in many ways cashing in as he went along. So when he died, he owned 4 farms and a whole set of scutch of houses in Peel that he could then pass on to his children. And as I say, he passed on one of the farms to his 4 daughters, to his daughters, for them to rent out to live off. Other people just didn't get out in time. There was a bankruptcy in Peel of someone, and the bankruptcy case, you could see how he was losing money. And they weren't able to pay him. He was like Morrison. He was providing provisions for the fishing fleets. They weren't able to pay him. They weren't getting enough at Crookhaven to actually pay him for that. So he started taking their shares in the boat. So he ended up hoping that the fishing would come back. And in the end, it just completely collapsed and just left him with an enormous debt. And so, but it was already starting to drop off in the 1890s. Many of the letters, Faragher is coming back from Crookhaven and saying we didn't earn much this year. And so what Karl Roeder tried to do was what was quite common at this particular period, was to open a subscription list up to try and raise money to keep Faragher in Cregneash. And here you get this. This is pomposity to the max, I would actually think, I fear I must say at once that I could neither promise to write about him nor to get contributions on his behalf, As a Manxman, really? Is that what you were, Hall Caine? I thank you for the great interest you've shown on this true son of the soil. And I love this line here. You may not perhaps have as many opportunities as I have of knowing men of the same class in this island. I don't think Hall Caine was sleeping on a couch at Ballafesson somehow. I don't think he was out and about in the countryside. And that's not just the only letter we have from Hall Caine, because obviously this is May, and there's another letter here back in June. I've read the poems with pleasure, blah blah blah. Here once again here, And what he says here, I do not think that the public would consider me justified in writing about the author as one who merited individual recognition on the score of his gifts. What can you say? What can you say? So that's Hall Caine. And do you all want to read Karl Roeder's response? This is Karl Roeder's response to Sophia Morrison. This is a letter written after Faragher's death in 1908. I deeply lament the death of my old friend Faragher. He was a very disappointed man. He was very shabbily treated by the Manx people who ignored him. Amongst them, that patronising Hall Caine. Words, 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 and skin flinty. If he would have had it in any ways been encouraged, he could have done an enormous lot with his immense knowledge of Manx ways, life and folk science and language. Yeah. It's a great letter. You got to admire Roeder for writing that. But it's 1907. He has to leave Cregneash. He moves off to live with his brother. But he doesn't live that long. To be honest, his death comes in 1908. And then we have this particular letter here from Edward Faragher here. But we have this letter. This is from Faragher's son, actually. And he say, my father passed away very peacefully at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. It was a happy release. Unconscious for 2 days previously, I feel quite run down. Has been something ill. He says, will you please let the people in the island who are interested in him, who you know. P.S. The funeral will take place on Tuesday next at 3 o'clock. And this is Karl Roeder. He writes a letter to the Isle of Man Examiner. And I regret to have to inform you of the death on the 5th of our old friend Edward Faragher, late of Cregneash, the home of his son. Once again, I knew it cost him a great fight, and it was with a bleeding heart he had to tear himself away from his native heath, which he so deeply loved. He also suffered many ways because he was a poet, and because he was known as a poet, that I mentioned that people would come to him at Cregneash, and he would have to spend his time writing out poems for people. There was also one time too where he was working in the harvest field, and he was called away from the harvest field as well. And a lot of people in Cregneash resented him for the attraction that he had sort of brought upon the village in many ways. And there's also too an incident that happens when Roeder was running his Manx Notes and Queries column in the Isle of Man Examiner, which, because Manx people did not contribute as he hoped would contribute, he fills up the columns with material largely taken from Edward Faragher. And you can recognise from the style of the material that he's reproducing that this material comes from Faragher, and clearly we can see lost notebooks in that as well. But there's one set of when he has a column in Manx Notes and Queries, and it's about ghosts. And the finger is pointed at Edward Faragher for providing this material to Roeder. And he has to publish a disclaimer the next week in the Isle of Man Examiner saying this material did not come across from Roeder. This material did not come from Faragher at all. It doesn't mention who it comes across. It comes from someone else. So it shows you that Roeder had other people. He was collecting from other people, not just John Hudson, perhaps not just Edward Faragher, but other people as well. But I think what you can take from that as well is that it shows you that people in Cregneash read the Isle of Man Examiner. That they're not sitting up there as some sort of benighted village out of time or something like that, sort of going up on the Mole Hill there and looking down and sort of saying things like, oh, that railway's coming here, or it's all going to change once the railway gets here, or maybe it'll never change up here, and so on and so on. You could see from that photograph of 1899, they were all changing Cregneash. They didn't want thatch roofs, they wanted an extra story on more space and a slate roof. But anyway, so he writes this wonderful letter into the Examiner. Okay, let's get back to where I get the title of the talk from. Yet I often think of you and but very few besides you. And this I find once again, just like that other light we said, I'm just looking much for a sight of the sea. I find this is so heart-rendering. It's a letter from Edward Faragher to Karl Roeder. It's April 14th. He dies in June. I rather suspect this is the last letter. It's the last letter extant. It's the last letter we have between them. But I rather feel, given the time and the frequency of correspondence, that this is likely the last letter that he ever writes. I received the tobacco in the paper this morning. Now, this is another thing that I haven't mentioned, is that Roeder supported Faragher. He sent him books. He sent him tobacco. He sent him a pipe once when he broke his pipe. He also sent him postal orders as well. So he gave him some financial support as well. Also, too, he sent him the Isle of Man Examiner every week. And by him getting the Isle of Man Examiner, he knew that Roeder was still alive. But he sends this particular letter, and you can see, obviously, he says here, you know, my head is a good deal easier, but I'm not safe to go out about. I'm apt to stagger and fall, and so on. But look at this line. Yet I often think of you, and but very few beside you. You know, it's just, yeah. And more than that as well, is that this is how he signs the letter. Now, I embolden this. He says here, I must now conclude and remain your friend, Edward Faragher. This is unusual because the other letters are all signed either sincerely yours, Edward Faragher, or yours sincerely, Edward Faragher. Here he signs off, I must now conclude and remain your friend, Edward Faragher. He knows the end is coming. I mean, I don't think that's reading too much into it. He knows his end is coming, and so he needs to tell Roeder that he is his friend. He is his friend. After all these years, the first letter is 1896, and we have a letter here in 1908. This is a friendship that has just gone on, and a friendship that's you know that has lasted. And I find this again goes back to his letter to the Isle of Man Examiner, that Roeder was away when Faragher died. I would have written before, but unfortunately the letter which announced his death only reached me today, having been away from business during Whit Week. So he wasn't able to attend the funeral. And I find that just so sad. But he's left us the notebooks, he's left us the letters, and also thanks to Edwin Goodwin and Sophia Morrison, we've also have other materials among that have also been copied, of the originals of which have been lost. So it's thanks to Roeder, it's thanks to Faragher, it's thanks to Morrison, it's thanks to Goodwin that we do indeed have this particular material. Okay, this talk is given as part of the Year of Manx, and I want to end here with a great quote. Again, so let's end on a better note here. Manx is all the go in the island now. So yeah, so it's not just 2026, it's also 1899 as well. Manx is all the go in the island now. They're getting up schools in Douglas to learn the Manx language. But I fear it'll be a long time before the grown-up folks will learn it. The children may learn it soon, but old folks can hardly learn to pronounce it. But that's a great note to end on, you know. Manx is all the go now. But I will end up on a final slide, and I don't have enough time to run through this slide. This is taken from his sketch of old Cregneash, which he appended to his translation of Aesop's fables. And this again is where he's sort of he's sort of thinking back on life here in Cregneash here. The little garden in front of old Etty's cottage has disappeared. The haggard, where as boys we used to play amongst the stacks of corn at Tiplift Torren, is like the rest of the common, and Margaret's old haggard is trodden like the highway. I think he's talking here literally, and I also think he's talking here figuratively here as well. You know, that if we forget the past, if we forget what it means to be Manx, that the haggard will be trodden like the highway and there will be nothing left of us. So I think it's really great that Faragher has left behind what he's left behind. It's great that Roeder has left what Roeder has left behind. It's great that Morrison has left what Morrison has left behind. And it's great too that Edwin Goodwin has left what is behind. But I think if we don't want to have our haggard of Manxness trodden like the highway, what we really have to do is to make sure that Manx is all the go. And I think that could be a great phrase. If people question, say things like, why should we be doing anything with Manx? It's a dead language, it's a revival language, why are you doing this? I think the best thing is just to say, well, As Edward Faragher once said, Manx is all the go in the island now, and that's good enough for me. So I hope you've got something from that. Sorry, maybe that was a bit quick. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, nevertheless, thank you.